The black SUV rolled up with its tinted windows, and a clipboard-wielding Karen stepped out like she owned the damn planet. Her lipstick was perfect. Her heels were unnecessarily high for a driveway ambush, and her smug smile chilled me more than the December breeze. She pointed at my wife's belly like it was a violation of community standards. "Pregnancy is not permitted in our neighborhood," she announced with the twisted confidence of someone who's rewritten reality. "You're coming with me." It was supposed to be a new beginning, a peaceful chapter after years of working dangerous cases, buried in classified files and coded dossiers, chasing shadows through cities that never slept. I had taken a step back from the bureau, well, officially on leave, because my wife and I had something more important to focus on. Family. She was 7 months pregnant, glowing with that kind of warmth and anticipation that makes everything else fade into the background. We found this quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes outside the city, tucked between rolling cul-de-sacs and artificial lakes with ducks that looked like they were hired to complete the Serenity vibe. The homes were identical in that charming enough to be creepy way, and the lawns were trimmed with cult-like precision. It was perfect, or at least it looked perfect. We bought a white 2-story house with blue shutters, a wraparound porch, and a magnolia tree out front that swayed gently like something out of a Hallmark movie. I remember telling my wife, "If trouble ever finds us here, it's because the devil uses GPS." We had been here 2 weeks before I heard the first rumblings. Neighbors whispering about the HOA queen. That's what they called her, though never to her face. Her real name was Karen Whitmore, president of the Homeowners Association for the last 7 years, and, according to neighborhood lore, the self-proclaimed guardian of aesthetics and moral standards. She was maybe in her early 50s, always dressed like she had a court appearance, and walked her yappy little Pomeranian like she was patrolling a military base. The first time I met her was when she knocked on our door with a clipboard in one hand and a tote bag that said, "Curb Appeal Matters" in the other. She didn't smile when I answered, didn't even introduce herself. She just said, "Your mailbox is an inch too high. That's a code violation." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" She repeated it, this time tilting her head as if to question whether I was literate. "The maximum height for mailboxes in this community is 41 inches. Yours is 42. I measured. She handed me a bright yellow slip of paper that said, "Notice of Noncompliance," in bold red font. Then she turned and walked off like she'd just handed me a subpoena. I laughed it off. My wife, bless her, tried to be diplomatic and said Karen was probably just trying to keep the place orderly. But over the next few days, we got notices for the most ridiculous things. A decorative pumpkin that violated seasonal decor restrictions. A wind chime that could be audible past 8 p.m. Even a complaint about the way we'd arranged our porch chairs. "They don't face the street," Karen had written, "and therefore lack neighborly openness." Still, we figured it's a neighborhood and every neighborhood has its quirks. We didn't want to cause trouble. My wife was focused on the baby, decorating the nursery, joining a mom-to-be group that met at the clubhouse. We just wanted peace. But that illusion shattered when Karen showed up again, this time during one of our Sunday porch mornings. My wife was sipping chamomile tea and humming along to a soft playlist on her phone. I was flipping through a book, enjoying the sun and her smile when the clack of heels on concrete broke the rhythm. Karen stood at the base of our porch stairs, flanked by 2 women who looked like they had just come from a board meeting and hadn't smiled since the Clinton administration. One held a camera, the other a binder. "We need to conduct a compliance inspection," Karen said, already walking up onto our property without invitation. I stood. "Hold on. An inspection for what?" Karen motioned to my wife's belly like it was a bomb. For her. There was a moment of silence so thick it made the birds stop chirping. "Excuse me," I said slowly. Karen didn't flinch. "We have a clause in our community charter," she said, flipping open a binder and pointing to a section I'd never seen. "This neighborhood is zoned for quiet living. That includes the restriction of excessive noise, unsanctioned gatherings, and temporary residents who may cause disruption. Pregnancy falls into that category." I blinked, sure I was being pranked. "You're saying pregnant people can't live here?" My wife, pale and trembling, clutched her stomach protectively. That's absurd. It's policy, Karen said, like she was reciting scripture. We had an incident 2 years ago. Couple had twins. Cried all night. Disturbed the entire block. It took us months to recover property value. She turned to her assistant. Record this, Judy. I stepped forward, voice calm but with that old fire simmering in my chest. You are not going to film my pregnant wife on our property. Karen smiled, tight, smug, unbothered. Sir, this is a compliance matter. We are well within our rights. Show me the clause, I said. Page 78, she replied instantly. I snatched the binder and flipped to the page, which was conveniently highlighted. But as I read it, it was nothing but vague language about residential tranquility and prevention of disruption. Nothing about pregnancy. This doesn't say anything about pregnancy, I said, holding it up. It says the HOA reserves the right to address potential community disturbances at their discretion. Karen snapped back. And as president, I am that discretion. I looked at my wife. She looked back at me, silently asking if this was real life. Let me be very clear, I said, stepping between Karen and my wife. You come onto my property again with this kind of nonsense, and you'll be dealing with more than just an angry homeowner. Karen squinted at me, her smile faltering for the first time. Is that a threat? No, I said. It's a promise of escalation, the legal kind. She didn't like that. She gave one last look to her clipboard, scribbled something, and turned on her heel. We'll be back. You've been warned. The 2 assistants followed, heels clicking like retreating stormtroopers. I stood there for a long moment, watching them go, my heart pounding. My wife touched my hand. What just happened? I shook my head. Something tells me we've just been labeled enemies of the HOA. That night, I stayed up reading every page of that charter. I highlighted the contradictions, the loopholes, the utterly ridiculous bylaws that gave people like Karen the illusion of power. What I saw wasn't a neighborhood, it was a fiefdom. And Karen was the queen. My FBI instincts kicked in, but I told myself to hold off. This wasn't a federal case. This wasn't a cartel or cyber terrorists. It was a power-tripping suburban dictator with a clipboard and a delusion. But something in my gut told me she wasn't finished. This was just the opening move. And the next time she showed up, she wouldn't be holding a binder. She'd be holding something far more dangerous. A plan. A plan to remove us, and especially my pregnant wife, from her neighborhood. I just didn't know how far she was willing to go. Not yet, but I would. Very soon. The sun hadn't even broken over the rooftops the next morning when the first real sign of escalation arrived. A thick envelope stamped with the HOA's golden crest landed in our mailbox like a warning shot. I opened it, standing barefoot in the driveway, still groggy and in my robe. Inside were 4 pages of formal language and bureaucratic nonsense, all centered around one thing: the non-compliance of community tranquility standards due to unregulated gestational residency. I read that phrase twice, thinking maybe I was still half asleep. But no, that's exactly what it said. They had filed an official complaint against my wife's pregnancy. Page 2 informed us that a compliance hearing had been scheduled for the following Saturday at the HOA clubhouse, and attendance was mandatory. Page 3 had a list of possible resolutions, one of which included temporary relocation until post-delivery. The last page had a red ink stamp at the bottom reading urgent. I took a deep breath, trying not to crush the papers in my hand. That day, Karen seemed to be everywhere. She stood on the sidewalk, arms folded, watching our house like she was waiting for us to pack up and flee. At one point, my wife caught her pacing past the backyard fence, making notes in a little leather-bound journal. I wanted to confront her, but instead, I started making calls. First to the local zoning office, then to the county records department, finally to a lawyer friend of mine who specialized in HOA law. Each of them said the same thing: there's no legal way an HOA can regulate pregnancy. But that didn't stop Karen. That afternoon, she distributed flyers around the neighborhood, a call to preserve peace and order. On them was a picture of a generic crying baby with a red X across its face, followed by a bulleted list of how infants destabilize community rhythm. The worst part? Some neighbors agreed. Not all, but enough. A few whispered, "I'm sorry," when they passed me at the mailbox. Others avoided eye contact. A woman named Paula who lived 3 doors down told my wife at the supermarket, "I hope this doesn't get ugly. We just want a quiet place to live." It was a sickness, spreading slowly through the neatly trimmed lawns and pristine sidewalks. Karen had weaponized fear, masking her absurd crusade behind terms like order, uniformity, and preservation. And then came the moment that crossed the line from ridiculous to criminal. Saturday arrived. We showed up to the compliance hearing just to make a statement, to say we weren't afraid. The clubhouse was already buzzing with murmurs when we walked in. Karen stood at the front in a red blazer, flanked by her loyal board members. She smiled like a politician seconds before passing a corrupt bill. We sat in 2 metal chairs placed purposefully in the center of the room, as if we were defendants at a tribunal. "Thank you for joining us," Karen began. "This hearing is to address the violation of Section 11C of the Community Code." "There is no Section 11C," I interrupted. She cleared her throat. "It's in the pending revisions. You can't hold a hearing on a rule that doesn't exist." She smiled sweetly. "Mr. Collins, we are allowed to make executive decisions for the safety of our residents." "She's not a threat," I said, motioning to my wife. "She's pregnant, not radioactive." "Please," Karen said with that tone that made your skin crawl. "Let's not be dramatic. We're just here to reach a peaceful agreement." That agreement included mandatory curfews for my wife, no outdoor appearances past 6 p.m., sound monitoring equipment for crying, which hadn't even started yet, and the kicker, a temporary relocation to the HOA-owned unit on the edge of the neighborhood for the duration of her gestational period. I stood so fast my chair fell over. "You're asking her to move out?" Karen didn't blink. "We're offering her a more appropriate space, free of stimuli, distractions, and potential neighborhood disruption." "You're insane," I said. "You don't have the authority to detain or displace anyone, let alone for being pregnant." Karen's smugness cracked for a moment. "Then you leave us no choice." That night, I made plans to file a formal legal complaint against the HOA. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them intimidate us into submission. But before I could even put pen to paper, the unthinkable happened. Monday morning, around 9 a.m., my wife stepped onto the porch to water her plants. I was inside on the phone with the county office. I remember the sound of tires screeching, a door slamming, and then her scream. I bolted outside just in time to see 2 men in white polo shirts, HOA uniforms apparently, grabbing my wife by the arms. Karen was standing on the lawn, clipboard in hand, barking orders. "She's in violation. Take her to the compliance unit. It's for her own safety." My wife was crying, struggling to pull away, yelling my name. My blood turned to fire. I didn't even think. I sprinted down the porch steps, intercepting the goons before they could drag her off the property. I slammed one of them to the ground with a tackle I hadn't used since my field days, then spun and grabbed the other by the collar. "Let her go. We have orders." "From who? Karen?" I snarled. "She's not the law. I am." They backed off, one of them limping, the other holding his chest where I'd clocked him. Karen marched toward me, waving her papers. "This is an authorized removal." "No," I growled, stepping between her and my wife. "This is kidnapping, and you just crossed a federal line." She sneered. "You think threats will save you?" "No," I said, "but jurisdiction will." I pulled my wallet from my back pocket and flipped it open, revealing the silver badge that glinted like a dagger in the sunlight. Her eyes flickered. "You're FBI?" I leaned in, voice like ice. Surprise. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen looked like she had swallowed a lemon soaked in gasoline. Her mouth opened, then closed. You just attempted to forcibly remove a U.S. citizen from their home under false authority," I said. "You think an HOA is above the Constitution? This is community law," she shouted, desperation seeping into her voice. You can't stop us from maintaining order. Watch me. I walked my wife inside and called 3 numbers, one to the local police department, one to my bureau contact still active in the Organized Domestic Threats Division, and one to my lawyer. Karen stayed on the lawn for almost 30 minutes, shouting at nobody. Eventually, she stormed off with her clipboard, teeth clenched so tight I thought they might crack. That night, I sat with my wife on the couch, holding her hand as she sobbed from the trauma of it all. I promised her this wasn't over, that I would make Karen regret every second of this war she'd started. Because now it wasn't just about mailbox heights or wind chimes. This wasn't petty anymore. This was personal. This was criminal. She tried to take my family. And I don't care how many bylaws she's hiding behind. There's no rulebook big enough to protect her from what's coming. Karen disappeared for 2 days after the abduction attempt, which I assumed was the HOA version of a tactical retreat. But I knew better than to think it was over. People like her don't walk away from power plays. They regroup, whisper in dark corners, and wait until they think you've let your guard down. But I hadn't. In fact, this time I was ready. I spent those 2 days quietly building my case. First, I installed a new surveillance system, 8 HD security cameras, all hidden in plain sight. Every corner of our property, from the front porch to the side gate, was now under 24/7 eyes. I upgraded the locks, added a panic button system, and even called in a favor from an old bureau contact to sweep the house for bugs. You might think that's overkill for a neighborhood feud, but when you've worked in domestic counterintelligence, you learn that threats often come with smiling faces and HOA stationery. I also started combing through the HOA's legal filings and board meeting transcripts. Karen had left a digital trail wider than an airport runway. I found evidence of manipulated votes, altered budgets, and mysterious expenses filed under neighborhood reinforcement measures. At one point, she had diverted HOA funds to build a so-called community meditation space, which was actually a converted shed stocked with surveillance monitors. But the real goldmine came when I discovered something called Emergency Directive 13. Buried deep in the revised charter, it gave the HOA president emergency powers in the event of unusual residential disruptions. It was vague, almost comically so, and it had clearly been written to justify whatever power grabs Karen felt like making at any given moment. Worse, it had never been voted on by residents. It had simply appeared in the latest charter revision, which, conveniently, she'd distributed during a time when most of the community had been out of town for maintenance on the water system. It was a paper coup, but it wouldn't hold. I started documenting everything, creating a digital file with screenshots, timestamps, video clips, audio recordings. I even recorded myself narrating what had happened during the attempted kidnapping. Not just because I wanted to protect my family, but because I knew Karen was going to try again. And this time, I wanted to be the one holding the strings. She reemerged on Wednesday morning with all the fanfare of a dictator returning to the throne. A new flyer was taped to every front door, important compliance advisory regarding non-standard family situations. The language had shifted from hostile to legalese, clearly a result of her having spoken to a lawyer. But that didn't make it any less absurd. The flyer stated that, due to ongoing disturbances created by the presence of non-compliant gestational occupancy, a special board vote would be held to decide whether to temporarily suspend the residency of disruptive individuals until harmony can be restored. My wife read it and immediately broke down into tears. That was the moment I realized I wasn't going to wait for Karen's next move. I was going to force her hand. That night, I walked the neighborhood alone. Slowly, quietly, and as I walked, I slipped a different kind of flyer under every door. It was simple, black and white, no logos, no threats. Just facts. Did you know the HOA never officially passed Directive 13? Did you know your dues have paid for Karen's private surveillance system? Did you know she attempted to forcibly remove a resident under fabricated authority? At the bottom was a link to a private web page I'd created, one that contained every shred of evidence I had gathered so far. I didn't sign the flyer. I didn't need to. By Thursday afternoon, the neighborhood was buzzing. People were peeking through curtains, whispering in driveways, texting each other with questions like, "Did you see this?" And, "Is this real?" Karen, of course, went into overdrive. She called an emergency HOA board meeting, which I was conveniently not invited to. But my friend Dave, who lived 2 doors down and had once served on the board before Karen forced him out over bush height violations, decided to attend anyway. He texted me from the parking lot. She's spiraling, accusing everyone of being part of a smear campaign, claimed she's been hacked. 2 board members walked out mid-meeting. I smiled for the first time in days. Not because I enjoy chaos, but because chaos in a corrupt regime means the beginning of collapse. But just when I thought she might be retreating into damage control, she launched her boldest move yet. Friday morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee when a knock sounded on the door. It wasn't forceful. It was that knock you hear when someone thinks they have the upper hand. I opened it to find a man in a navy blue suit, clipboard in hand, and a shiny black car idling behind him. "Mr. Collins?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm with Community Wellness and Compliance, third-party contractor for the HOA. I'm here for a residency evaluation." "A what?" "Under Section 13 Emergency Review Protocol," he said, flipping through papers. "There are concerns about the long-term viability of your household's compliance. You're here to determine if my pregnant wife is viable?" "Sir," he said calmly, "I'm just doing my job." "Your job," I said slowly, "is attempting to enforce an unauthorized, unratified bylaw created by a woman who is currently under investigation for misusing HOA funds and attempting to orchestrate an illegal detainment." His smile faltered. I don't know anything about that." "You do now." I pulled out my phone and hit record. "Why don't you tell me again why you're here, this time on camera?" He hesitated. "I think I should call my supervisor." "Good idea." He turned and practically sprinted back to his car. The whole thing was on video. I uploaded it to the same private site, adding a caption. "They're now sending unlicensed contractors to intimidate residents. Share this." Within an hour, the video had spread across every group chat in the neighborhood. People were furious. The HOA's official Facebook page was flooded with angry comments. Karen deleted the page by sunset. That night, I sat in my garage with the door cracked open, sipping coffee and reviewing files. My wife was asleep inside, finally getting rest without clutching pepper spray under her pillow. I knew Karen was watching. She always was. But what she didn't know was that I'd already filed a federal complaint, that the local PD had quietly opened a file, that my friends at the Bureau were now very interested in her sudden use of intimidation tactics. But I wasn't going to move too soon. Not yet. I needed her to feel safe. I needed her to think she had regained control. I needed her to think she was winning, because the more confident Karen got, the more mistakes she would make. And the more mistakes she made, the deeper the trap would spring. What she didn't realize was that while she was busy patrolling bushes and mailboxes, I had been trained to dismantle insurgencies. I had spent years breaking down psychological profiles, flipping double agents, and running black bag operations in cities where being wrong meant ending up in a shallow grave. This was a neighborhood squabble. To her, it was a fight over rules. But to me, it was now a matter of principle. And if Karen wanted to play this like a war, then she was going to learn exactly what kind of enemy she'd made. All she had to do was make one more move, and she would. They always do. Saturday morning arrived like the eye of a storm, eerily calm, deceptively quiet. For the first time in weeks, there were no notices taped to my door, no strangers prowling the property pretending to be compliance officers, and no Karen pacing on the sidewalk with her ever-present clipboard. It should have felt like relief. Didn't. I knew what this was. Karen's reset, the breath before the plunge. She'd gone too far to back down, too obsessed with power to admit defeat. I'd seen this before in interrogation rooms with men who believed their lies so deeply they'd rather burn everything down than surrender. I told my wife to rest and tried to go about my day like normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something big. I just didn't know how far she'd go, or who she'd bring down with her. By noon, I had my answer. A sleek black van rolled into the neighborhood, unmarked except for a small CPS placard in the window. Child Protective Services. At first, I thought maybe it was unrelated. But then the caseworker stepped out holding a folder with our address printed in bold. My stomach dropped. I stepped out to meet her halfway down the driveway. "Mr. Collins?" she asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear and squinting at the sunlight. "That's me," I said. "What's this about?" She gave me a strained smile, the kind professionals wear when they know they're walking into a landmine. "We received an anonymous complaint about unsafe prenatal conditions in the household. We're obligated to investigate." I didn't need to ask who had made the call. "This is about my wife's pregnancy, isn't it?" I asked. "Someone reported us for, what, incubating a disruption?" "I can't discuss the details of the report," she replied, obviously rehearsed. "But I do need to speak with your wife." I stepped in front of her. "Let me be clear. There are no other children in the house. My wife is 7 months pregnant. That's it. So unless the report accuses the fetus of vandalism, this is a waste of your time." She hesitated. "I still have to follow through." I nodded, stepped aside, and let her pass. My wife was resting, but when the woman gently explained the situation, she sat up, calm and composed, her fingers resting on her belly. "Let me guess," she said. "Was the complaint signed with a K?" The caseworker didn't answer. It was clear from the questions she asked that the complaint was vague, almost ridiculous. Concerns about excessive stress, potentially dangerous household tensions, and lack of pregnancy accommodations. But as I stood there watching, a sick thought occurred to me. Karen wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying to destroy, not physically, socially, legally. She knew she couldn't remove us directly, so she was trying to taint us, to paint us as unstable, dangerous, unfit. If even one of these reports stuck, we'd be dealing with real consequences. Custody challenges, black marks on our record, future problems with housing, adoption, even employment clearance. This wasn't war over a neighborhood anymore. This was Karen trying to annihilate our lives. After the caseworker left, apologizing profusely and clearly embarrassed, we sat in silence for a long time. Then I stood, went into the study, and opened a locked drawer. Inside was a flash drive and a burner phone. I hadn't planned to use either. But now the gloves were off. That night, I sent out a new wave of documents. Anonymous, untraceable, but surgical. The files included Karen's real estate license, which I discovered was expired. A financial spreadsheet showing she'd billed the HOA for a security perimeter that didn't exist. And, most damning of all, a series of audio clips I'd collected from my outdoor cameras. They included Karen referring to my wife as a walking liability, instructing HOA volunteers to remove non-compliant elements by any means necessary, and even saying, "Sometimes you have to break a few eggs to keep the neighborhood pure." I didn't post them on public forums. No, I sent them directly to 3 people. The HOA board's vice president, a soft-spoken guy named Barry who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, a retired judge who lived 2 streets over, and my contact at the local news station. Within 24 hours, the neighborhood erupted. An emergency HOA meeting was called, this time without Karen presiding. Flyers went out under Barry's name, not hers. Rumors swirled about an internal audit, about the police being contacted, about Karen taking a break for health reasons. But Karen wasn't the type to go quiet. At exactly 3 p.m. that Sunday, she sent out a mass email titled Statement of Truth, my response to the smear campaign. It was 6 pages long and packed with rambling paragraphs about my alleged psychological instability, how my wife had weaponized her womb for sympathy, and how the HOA had been infiltrated by anti-order radicals. It ended with a line that chilled me. "Some people think they're above the rules, but they'll learn the hard way that no one is untouchable." An hour later, my wife vanished. I had gone to the hardware store to pick up weatherproofing for the nursery window. It was a 15-minute trip. When I came back, the front door was open. The house was quiet. No signs of a break-in. No sounds. Just silence. First, I thought she was napping again. But I checked every room. Nothing. Her phone was still on the counter, her tea half-drunk on the porch. That's when I saw it. A folded piece of HOA stationery, wedged under the fruit bowl. my name written across it in block letters. I opened it and read the single sentence typed in all caps. She's safe. When the noise is gone, you'll be welcome to return to peace. I froze. My training took over. I checked the house for hidden devices, called in a trace on the burner I'd used to send the anonymous files, and then reached out to every law enforcement contact I had left. Within an hour, I had 3 agents headed my way and a warrant application for Karen Whitmore's residence. But part of me already knew where she'd taken her. There was only one place she had full control: the HOA-owned compliance unit. It was a white-paneled single-story house on the edge of the neighborhood, meant to be a guest unit or overflow housing. But nobody used it. The windows were always shuttered, the lawn overgrown. It was where Karen took residence for quiet conversations. Now it was a holding cell, a prison dressed up as HOA policy. I drove there, silent and cold. No sirens, no backup, just me. When I arrived, the curtains were drawn and the front door was locked tight. But as I walked around back, I saw her, my wife, sitting on a cot inside, visible through the cracked blinds. She looked unharmed, just scared. Karen's voice drifted through the window. "This is for your own good. You need to understand how serious this is. Your husband is trying to ruin everything we've built." I called her name. My wife turned. Karen's voice cut off. Then the door opened, and Karen stepped out. She looked different, no longer smug or pristine. Her hair was wild, her eyes glassy, and her blazer wrinkled like she'd slept in it. "I told you," she said, her voice trembling. "I warned you." I stepped forward. "Let her go. She's contaminating the peace," Karen whispered. "She's the reason the neighborhood is cracking. She brought in chaos." I saw it in her eyes. "Karen," I said, calmly reaching into my pocket. "You're done." She laughed, a high-pitched, breaking sound. "You think this is about you? This is bigger than you. Bigger than your fake little family. I created this place. I kept it pure. I held up my badge. You just kidnapped a federal officer's wife." Her face twitched. Then the sirens came. 3 unmarked vehicles pulled up to the curb as agents in tactical gear exited. Karen looked around like a cornered animal, reality closing in on her in real time. She ran, straight into her own front yard. The last place she had control. It was over. But the revenge? That was only just beginning. They arrested Karen on her perfectly manicured lawn. Right between the "No Parking on Grass" sign and the rhododendrons she fined the Hendersons for planting without approval. The irony was too thick to ignore. She was still yelling when they cuffed her, raving about neighborhood purity and gestational disorder threats, insisting that this was a community matter, not a federal one. The agents barely said a word. They didn't need to. She was being charged with unlawful detainment, impersonating a legal authority, obstruction of justice, and a long list of civil rights violations. The compliance unit where she kept my pregnant wife had surveillance cameras, locks only accessible with a code that only Karen had, and, worst of all, padded soundproof insulation. She'd planned everything. It was premeditated, and now she was screwed. But the public didn't know that. Not yet. That was where I came in. Because justice in the courts was fine, but justice in the court of public opinion, that's where people like Karen really burn. I started by leaking the full story to a local news outlet. Not the stiff, boring pieces that quoted HOA bylaws and board policies. No, this was personal. I gave them security footage of the kidnapping, audio recordings of Karen admitting she was restructuring the neighborhood's demographic timeline, and even the clip of her referring to my wife as an unsanctioned maternal anomaly. The headlines came fast. HOA president arrested for kidnapping pregnant woman, neighborhood tyrant detained by FBI, gestational ban sparks federal probe. Karen's face was everywhere, her name trending on every social media platform. She went from feared HOA dictator to a meme in under 24 hours. Someone photoshopped her into a maternity ward, pointing at a baby and screaming, "You're too loud." Another edit showed her in a straitjacket made of HOA violation notices. The entire internet turned on her. But I wasn't done. While she waited in a holding cell, I filed a formal petition to the county clerk's office for a full audit of the HOA's finances. See, over the last 6 months, Karen had filed more than $75,000 in community defense expenses. Most of that money came from dues, paid by families she had intimidated into silence. With help from a former bureau forensic accountant and a little digging of my own, I connected the dots. Karen had been funneling HOA funds into a private account under the name Neighborhood Tranquility Solutions, LLC. She'd used that account to pay for the compliance unit's renovations, hire her so-called enforcers, and even bribe a paralegal into drafting a fake version of the Charter's emergency directive section. I packaged it all into a neat 92-page report and submitted it to the district attorney. At the same time, I sent an open letter to the neighborhood, digitally and in print. The letter was direct. I laid out what Karen had done, how she'd manipulated the board, rewritten the charter without consent, and tried to remove a pregnant woman for the crime of existing. I included footnotes, links, screenshots, receipts. I told the residents they had a choice. They could rebuild, or they could let another Karen rise from the ashes of the old one. By the next HOA meeting, the community had made its choice. Over 100 residents showed up. That was a record. Many brought chairs, snacks, even folding tables. The entire clubhouse lawn became a protest site. Hand-painted signs read, HOA equals House of Abuse, and My Baby Screams in Freedom. Someone passed out shirts that said, Team Gestational Disruption. When the interim board called the meeting to order, the first vote was to permanently dissolve the HOA. Passed. Unanimously. With the HOA disbanded, the neighborhood returned to normal, but better. People repainted their shutters wild colors. Lawns got a little longer. Wind chimes jingled freely. The Hendersons planted a full garden of unapproved flowers. No one cared. Freedom had never looked so good. As for Karen, she faced criminal charges and civil suits from multiple residents. The DA pressed forward with 4 felony counts and nearly a dozen misdemeanors. Her trial was public and humiliating. Every clip, every memo, every ridiculous statement was played for a courtroom full of reporters and angry neighbors. When the judge asked if she had any remorse, she said, I only regret trusting people to respect the rules. She was sentenced to 18 months in county jail and banned from participating in any HOA activity for life. Not that it mattered, no one would have let her run a lemonade stand at that point. But I wasn't finished. I bought the old compliance unit at auction, turned it into a local community center called the Harmony House, a place where neighbors could gather. No rules, no fines, just friendship and support. We hosted baby showers, potlucks, even open mic nights. The first event? A celebration for my wife's safe delivery. Our daughter came into the world 2 weeks after Karen's conviction. Healthy, beautiful, and with a set of lungs loud enough to shake the heavens. At the party, we passed out cupcakes frosted with HOA notice designs. One of them read Violation. Too cute. People laughed, hugged, and danced in a way they never had before. One of my favorite moments came when Barry, the former vice president of the HOA, stood up and raised a toast. To the Collins family, he said, and to every family who had to live under fear, who were told they weren't welcome, who were labeled as disturbances. Today, we take our neighborhood back. The crowd erupted in cheers. I held my daughter and looked at my wife, knowing that no one would ever threaten them again. Not here. Not in our home. Not while I was alive. And just to make sure the message stuck, I installed a new sign on our front lawn. Simple, elegant, and impossible to miss. It read, Pregnant people welcome. HOA not. Below that, in smaller text, this property is protected by the United States Constitution, one former FBI agent, and a very angry mama bear. Proceed with caution. We never heard from Karen again. Last I checked, she moved to a different county under a different name. But I wasn't worried. Her reputation followed her like a scarlet letter. And this time, she didn't have a clipboard to hide behind. The neighborhood, now free of bylaws and power trips, became a better place. Real community replaced paper authority. People talked more, laughed louder, lived freer. As for me, I finally retired for real this time. Because after everything we went through, I realized something. My mission wasn't over when I left the bureau. It just changed zip codes. Protecting my family, defending our right to exist, and burning the HOA to the ground when they came for us, that was the real job. And I did it. With evidence. With fire. With absolute, irreversible revenge. Karen thought she could scare us into silence. She thought the rules would protect her. But in the end, all she did was expose herself. And the last thing she saw before the cops dragged her away was me, standing on my porch, smiling and waving